This home at 55 Pepper Drive in Los Altos is the city's first residential landmark. It was built by Marvin and Margaret Adams in 1906, very soon after the San Francisco earthquake. The Adams family has been an important family in the history of Los Altos. Tonight, we'll be finding out more about them and about this very important Los Altos landmark. Hello, I'm Nan Geschke, your host for the Los Altos History Show. Tonight we have John Baer joining us. Welcome to the History Show, John.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. John is a partner in a venture capital firm here on the peninsula, and he and his wife Lois and children currently live in San Francisco, but they're planning to move to 55 Pepper Drive as soon as their planned restoration of the property is complete. John, how did you and your wife get interested in Los Altos in general and 55 Pepper Drive in particular?
We were looking for a house in the Mid-Peninsula area, looking for a community to raise our family, and looking for an older home, one that had some character and charm to it, and one that really hadn't been mucked up as often older homes are.
So have you been looking long for an older home?
We started looking, it took us about 9 months to find a house.
Oh, that's interesting. So what was it that attracted you so much to 55 Pepper?
Well, it's a delightful old home, man. It really has had some updating over the years, but really nobody has gone in and altered the things that make an old home so wonderful. And it has a lot of charm and character, a wraparound porch in the front, some wonderful landscaping, and high ceilings, both downstairs and upstairs.
Yeah, those wonderful palm trees in the front, they're still there, aren't they?
They're still there. They're wonderful. They were planted right after the house was built in 1906, and they certainly are distinctive.
Yeah. Now, I understand, John, you've been a collector of stuff, you say, from the time you've been age 6 or under. What kind of stuff did you collect at age 6?
A little bit of everything. My parents had my grandparents had a house up in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, and had an old barn, and I used to collect whatever I could find in the old barn. And my collecting taste has gotten a little more sophisticated since then. About 20 years ago, I started collecting Victorian and turn-of-the-century furniture, and then about 10 years ago or so, I started collecting antique lighting.
Oh, antique lighting. So how far back does your lighting, or what time period are you concentrating on?
Well, most of it dates from about the 1880s, but I've got a chandelier that goes back to 1865 and some that's as late as the turn of the century.
Oh, and so have they been electrified, or are they still gas lighted, or?
Well, a lot of them are really how I found them, which covers a range from really being untouched and still able to burn gas, to those that have been drilled and electrified, to those that have been torn apart and various and assorted parts missing.
Oh. So what is it about lighting that is so is so important to you? Is there some sort of mystique about it, or?
There really is a mystique about antique lighting. Gas lighting really had its heyday in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, where you had incredible craftsmanship going on in those days. People really took attention and care in terms of both the design as well as in the detail. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of wonderful old lighting out there, so people aren't really aware of how glorious old lighting can be.
Oh, sounds like a neat hobby.
It's
probably
great.
an expensive one too, huh?
You can do it expensive or you can do it inexpensively. We've frequented flea markets at 3 o'clock in the morning with our flashlights, and we do it the inexpensive way.
Oh, that sounds like fun. That sounds like fun. Now, you also restore some of these lights, don't you?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Very often when we find them, they're in pretty rough shape. They'll be missing parts. They will have been drilled in various places, and very often, or most typically, the shades, the glass shades that would go on those lights are missing. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of very often finding the missing pieces, or in fact really designing the missing pieces, having somebody do lost wax casting on missing pieces, and then finding the right shades, the glass shades, to go on the chandelier or the wall sconce or the table light.
That's interesting. Now, do you belong to any societies or historical clubs that also sort of devote their attention to this kind of memorabilia or antique collecting, or is it just an individual interest of yours?
Well, I belong to most of the local organizations that are involved in historic houses. The San Francisco Victorian Alliance, the Victorian Society of America, the American Decorative Arts Forum in San Francisco, and they touch upon many different elements of Victoriana, ranging from the furniture to the lighting to the everyday items, silverware and whatever that went in Victorian homes.
So are you planning to use some of these or all of these objects in your new home, aren't you?
I think my wife will be very happy to get it all out of storage and out of boxes.
Out of
and
closets.
Out of closets. And not only that, but we have lots of other elements that would go in a home, and we plan on using things like pedestal sinks and stained glass windows and French doors and antique or turn-of-the-century toilets.
Oh, so you have fixtures and hardware and...
Right, yeah, doorknobs and hinges and all sorts of things, really, to make an old house complete.
Oh, that's neat. I know I wear another hat, and that's I'm chair of the Historical Commission here in town, as you know, John. And one of the projects that we've had for this past few months has been reevaluating properties. And since you've purchased the home, we've reevaluated the home on Pepper Drive, and because you've done such a great job at researching the home, we have actually increased the number of points that we've had. That's how we score a home. And so one of the ways that we look at a home is not just from its architecture and how old it is, but also who's been associated with the home. And like what we said at the beginning of the show was that this home was built by Marvin and Margaret Adams in 1906, right after the earthquake. And we know that they were very important to the town of Los Altos, or the little community of Los Altos that hadn't been incorporated yet. That didn't happen until the 1950s. But the community was growing, and the Adams were important to the beginning of this town. What do you know about the couple? Do you? I know that their one son just passed away this year.
That's correct.
But what do you know about Margaret and Marvin Sr.?
Well, they have an interesting background, actually. They came from the East Coast. They moved out to California in 1906. Marvin was a sugar broker for the Lamborn Company prior to moving to California and actually retiring at the age of 36. Pretty unusual in those days for somebody to retire.
36.
Very, very young. And Margaret was actually quite accomplished in her own right. She was had an education, had a master's degree from NYU, and then taught logics at Hunter College for a number of years, and then was married, and they moved to California.
I remember reading actually the transcript of a taped interview with Marvin Adams Jr., and his description of his mother was very glowing. It was very obvious from what he was saying about her that he admired her a great deal, and he called her a suffragette. So it kind of follows that she was well educated, and she seemed to be kind of in the thick of things.
Absolutely.
Taught school and so forth. But I understand that you have been in contact with some of the relatives of Marvin Adams Jr., and you've been able to uncover some artifacts that you want to share with us
Yes,
today.
actually. Marvin died about a year ago or so, and recently his home, the family had actually moved from the house on Pepper Drive to another home on University Avenue about 1919, and they lived there, and actually Marvin Jr. lived up there up until he died about a year ago or so. And the family was kind enough to lend me a number of the photographs and diaries and other materials. And there's some wonderful photographs.
Why don't we start with the diary
We'll start with the diary. Well, this diary is actually just wonderful. It's a diary from 1906, and I'd like to read a couple of entries here. One of the nicest entries is from April 16th, 1906. Emma, and this was written by Mrs. Adams. Emma met us in Palo Alto. We drove to Emma and Ed's house, where we will stay until we build in, and then there's a question mark. She doesn't know exactly
where
exactly what the town is, and of course Los Altos really didn't exist in 1906. The town really wasn't founded until 1907. And then another notation says, arrived at Mountain View, and presumably they had taken the train down. And Tuesday, April 17th, went up to our new orchard where our house is to be, and perfectly delighted with it. A most beautiful place with fine outlook.
Oh, that's charming.
It's really quite charming. And then she comes to visit the ranch several times, and then on May 16th, she writes, are going to live on our ranch this afternoon. Marvin Jr. and I will sleep in tent. And then, of course, the next day moved to the tent on our ranch.
So they lived in a tent while they started to prepare for this home that was going to be built.
Apparently
or
so.
ranch, they called it.
The ranch, right. And it was a working ranch. They wound up buying 30 acres of land and planting it with apricots and I believe peaches and cherries and perhaps some other fruits as well.
That's interesting. I just wanted to see if the camera could pick this up. It's so small. You see that? This diary in 1906. And you said that there was also an entry. Probably didn't get a very good picture of that. Okay. There was another entry for the day of the earthquake?
Yes, actually we can go back to that. And I guess Margaret was the master of the understatement. Wednesday, April 18th, the only entry is terrible earthquake at 5:13 a.m. Really the master of the understatement.
Yeah.
But the other interesting trivia in this is that the house was built relatively quickly, and it's actually very surprising given the shortage of building materials and really skilled labor at the time. On July 2nd, the notation says concrete foundation is being put in for our new house. And then we moved to October 27th, and the house is done.
Oh my.
Moved from a tent into our new house today.
That is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, thank you. This is really quite a treasure. Thank you for sharing that with us.
That's wonderful.
And you have some photographs too.
Yes, some great old photographs. The first one is, maybe you'd like to show the viewers, is a photograph of downtown Los Altos in, I believe, 1910.
It doesn't look quite like the bustling little town that we know, is it?
Not at all, and you can see the orchards on the Adams Ranch, and then in the background you can see downtown Los Altos, and there were about half a dozen buildings, perhaps.
Oh, I know. It's an amazing photograph. So what's next?
Next is a photograph of the house about 1910. And we know it's about 1910 because the house originally had a porch which was later screened in, and another porch was added along with a pergola. And that photograph from 1910 shows the pergola and the front porch, the wraparound front porch, and shows Margaret and Marvin together.
So these
Marvin Jr.
These are the children.
That's correct.
These are the children. So I hope you have a good look at that one.
And then we have another photograph taken in the front of the house that shows Margaret, Marvin, and Margaret Jr., otherwise known as Grace. And the other interesting thing to note in that photograph is the palm tree. The palm tree is about 1 foot high.
Oh, I know.
Today it's about 35 feet tall, so it's grown a little bit over the years.
That's marvelous to get the perspective on that.
Right. It's really wonderful.
By looking at these old photographs. So.
And this picture is just delightful. It's a photograph taken in the orchard, and it's Marvin Jr. and Grace bicycling through the orchard, and that's just a wonderful,
it captures an era of time that doesn't exist anymore in
Absolutely.
Los Altos. So it's really kind of a romantic picture, isn't it?
It's a very romantic photo. And then I have a photograph of Marvin Sr., and I'd like to read the notation on the back because, again, I think it talks to the period of time. And it says, Mr. Marvin O. Adams, Western representative of A.H. Lamburn and Company, those are the sugar brokers of New York, sugar brokers, due here from Manila in about a week from now.
Oh, gosh. So this is Marvin Sr. And he was, as we said, retired, but actually a gentleman farmer and a sugar broker, and was also in politics of sorts in Los Altos. Wasn't he involved with the school district at one time?
He was the first president of the school district. He later was a founder of a bank in Los Altos and became vice president of that bank, and he actually helped finance a number of the other orchards in the area. So he was very active.
Really interesting.
I guess he couldn't stay retired very long.
He couldn't. Well, I guess that's what happens to these entrepreneurs even today.
That's right. There really is an entrepreneurial heritage of the valley.
And this is a picture of Marvin Sr. and his daughter
Grace. That's correct. And that was taken about 1915 or 1917. And as you'll note, the palm tree has grown a little bit in the ensuing 10 years or so.
Good. Thank you for sharing these. These are wonderful. I have never seen these photographs before, and this is a wonderful treasure that you've uncovered for us. Thanks so much. Before we get on to your project and what you're planning to do, I know that both Mr. and Mrs. Adams Sr. were very prominent in the town, but also their children were also very important. And I know that Mrs. Adams, as well as her daughter-in-law, were involved with the San Antonio Club, as well as and also the Garden Club. So their names keep popping up throughout the sort of the history of Los Altos. So we really do consider them an important family, and really up until this year have been sort of continuously living in Los Altos. So
that's correct. Probably one of the longest-lived residents of Los Altos. Marvin Jr. Moved to Los Altos in 1906 and died 90 years later. So. Oh,
wow! Yes. So let's get on to your project. I know that you're just beginning.
That's correct.
What do you have planned for the home?
Well, our intention really is to take the house and bring it back to the way it was. The house has gone through a number of changes and iterations over the years. Some of those have been intentional and some of them have been unintentional. We believe somewhere around in the 1920s there was a fire in the attic. The third floor of the house had housed the servants when the Adams first built the house. And we believe there had been a fire there, and when the roof was reconstructed, it was constructed as a flat roof instead of a hip roof, and they put a balustrade around it. And that, of course, probably looked fine in 1920, and really looked fine up until recently, but having now discovered a number of the original photographs of the house, our intention is to restore the roof line. And there have been a number of other changes to the house over the time. I had mentioned earlier the original front porch had been screened in. The house in the 1920s had been turned into apartments, and that screened-in porch had actually been walled over, and we're going to restore it really to a sunroom kind of environment.
All right. So what your plan is then is to, I guess what you could sum up your philosophy of restoration is to try to bring it back to what you consider its original state?
As much as we can, bring it back to the original state, but also recognize that it's a home for us to live in, and modern plumbing and appliances.
Nice to have.
Nice to have, very nice to have, and but we're really going to maintain the flavor of the house from the turn of the century.
Yeah. What are some of the wonderful interior features that sort of captured your heart?
Well, the one that you notice most prominently when you walk in the house is the staircase, and there's an open railing at the top with the bedrooms coming off from each of those railings, and we plan on maintaining that. And you notice the scale. You've got 10-foot high ceilings and rooms that are really very large by today's standards, and certainly very large by turn of the century standards as well.
You must be very excited about starting this project.
Very excited.
Intimidated too, I know.
It's quite a big project.
Must feel that way as well.
Yes, very
well,
big
it's
project.
been just delightful to be talking with you tonight, John, about your project and also about the Adams family. We certainly appreciate all the research that you've done. I know we've really just scratched the surface in terms of talking about the family and their importance to Los Altos, but also I want to congratulate you and your wife on really taking on a project like this, because it's important to the city to have people like yourselves who really want to devote that time to restoring an old home, because it takes a special kind of person to be able to do that. We're going to be going out to meet John and Lois, hopefully your wife,
Hopefully.
in a couple of weeks, and to tape some before pictures of John and Lois's home on Pepper Drive. And I hope that you'll invite us back after the project is complete so we can take
Absolutely.
some after pictures.
Certainly.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. So that's all for what we're going to be taping this evening, but please stay tuned for our location roll-in. So thanks again, John, and let's go to that roll-in now. We're here with John and Lois Baer. Hi, Lois.
Hi.
We didn't get to speak in the studio.
No.
You weren't. John was alone, but we're here on a Saturday afternoon. It's a November day, and there's a little nip in the air. We've had some awfully warm weather this spring and summer and fall, so it kind of feels good to have fall upon us. We're in front of John and Lois's project, which is 55 Pepper, the property that we've been talking about in the studio. Now, it's quite overgrown here in the front of the property, John and Lois. Are you planning to do any landscaping at all after your project, or what's the plan here so that we can actually see this beautiful home?
We're going to make a number of changes, Nan. The idea is to strike a balance here between opening up the property a little bit more so that people can see part of the house from the street, that it's an inviting entrance to the house, and balance that with a need to maintain some level of privacy and maintain a feel of this house being surrounded by wonderful vegetation. And so our hope is, as you may see in front, we'll hopefully put in a picket fence, transplant some of the roses that are here on the property. There are 100 or 200 rose bushes. Put some in front of the picket fence, some behind, and then hope to plant a number of fruit trees in the front and in the back of the property. But the most striking feature of the property, as I'm sure you've noticed, are the palm trees, and we plan to keep them just where they are.
They're beautiful. Well, I know that Mrs. Adams was quite a gardener, and do you think that some of these rose bushes may have come from her?
It's entirely possible. We don't have any documentation on the any of the roses, but it does appear that some of the foliage has been here a very long time.
Now, Lois, I understand through John that you've hired a colorist, to help you with selecting the paint colors. How does that work? I've never heard of any such person.
Well, first John and I went through many books looking at some color ideas and looking at what's been done in other homes, and we got kind of an idea of what we liked. We also had driven around various neighborhoods looking at houses and picking out colors that we liked. Then we had a colorist come over, and he comes complete with an attaché case full of color samples, and they're rather large, and we just held them up to various places in the house, and he talked about what colors went well with other colors, and we made our selection from that.
So you're not going to keep this green and orange scheme?
No, we're not.
Now, I noticed that your front door is exceedingly beautiful. Do you think that's an original door, or do you think that's been added?
What do you think, John?
We believe it's original to the house. We've looked at it. It's certainly well weathered, and we plan on stripping it and restaining it and refinishing it. But it is a very pretty door.
It's a very pretty door. Now, I know that there are quite a few features in the house that you're going to be retaining interior as far as the interior design, but I know that there's one in particular that you want to share with us. So I thought maybe we could take a walk and see that very special feature.
Sure.
Okay, let's go. We have another member of the Bear family, Ellie Bear, with us. She's going to enjoy this home too, I'm sure. Now, this is a very, very nice foyer, but the feature that is most attractive, I think, is the staircase. Is that really what sold you on the house, Lois?
It definitely is. When I first walked into the house, when I went up the stairs, I thought it was just so lovely. In the area around the staircase upstairs, the walkways are so wide. I really thought it was one of the loveliest stair areas that I had seen in ever so many homes that we had been in.
So are you planning to open it up as far as color, because it's painted quite a dark red now? But I could see it, come alive if it were painted a little lighter color. Thank you for watching the Los Altos History Show, and we're going to say goodbye for now, but please join us the next time.